Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. This is a new presentation from www.central-mosque.com and the Humble Heart YouTube channel. It is the 42nd episode of the Making Sense series, and today we're going to analyze the American attack on Venezuela. So the title is Why Did America Attack Venezuela? Iran, Oil, and the Middle East Connection. So let's dive straight into it. So first, there are a few points which are obvious. So this should be easy to comprehend for anybody. So what are these obvious points? It is illegal. So to attack a sovereign nation, abduct its head of state, it is illegal, it is bullying, it is against United Nations conventions, it is against international laws, it is against any sort of legality. It is outside the bound of legal action. Simple as that, obvious. Now, the second obvious thing is people are asking how come China and Russia didn't intervene? So Venezuela, and Caracas to be specific, their capital is right in this zone of influence of United States Navy. It is not possible for either Russia or China to exert naval power or project naval power this close to the American mainland. It's simply not possible, right? So a lot of people are saying, Chinese are cowards, Russia's are cowards. The actions on the world stage are not taken in a binary manner and declaring someone brave or coward or whatever. That's not the way it works. There's 0 point in China and Russia projecting power in America's backyard, where America is just simply right there, right? This scenario will be reversed if you think about it. If China invades Taiwan, America will be projecting powers thousands of miles from its land. There will be a long supply line for the United States Navy, Air Force, Marines, whatever branch of military they use. So it's exactly the same thing. This is not worth it. It is simple as that. So China and Russia chose wisely and did not confront America in its own backyard. That is obvious. Secondly, the Venezuelan military and its decision makers were bribed. It's dead clear because the Delta forces simply flew over their capital in these mighty loud, huge target, Chinook helicopters, as you saw on your TV screens. If someone has a manpad, basically a shoulder mounted missile, this entire Delta Range force will be downed in no time. So it is clearly that Venezuela military was bribed, their decision makers were bribed, and America just walked in there, no problems, took the president, flew straight out. So the lack of action clearly indicates that the entire structure, civilian and military, was compromised and bribed. Fourth obvious point is Venezuela has oil, huge oil reserves, and their exports are minimal, and we'll talk about this in a second. So obviously Venezuela has oil. So those are the four obvious things. Now let's get to the analysis. Why did America invade Venezuela? Simple. For those who don't know, it has been a bedrock of US policy from the beginning, and it is called the Monroe Doctrine. It was introduced by President James Monroe in 1823, and then clauses were added to it in 1904 by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And it basically, in simple terms, or how I can make you understand, is America considers North, South, Central America its domain of influence, which means originally the Monroe Doctrine was directed towards the Europeans, but now in 2026, we can say that basically America does not want any foreign influence in its own backyard. America considers this its own backyards. Now, previous governments, you can say that, a few of the previous presidents have been lax on this Monroe Doctrine, but this is a bedrock of American foreign policy. You cannot mess around with America in its own backyard. What are the examples of that? Cuba. Cuba has been blockaded, has American sanctions, surrounded all over by America. Why? Because Cuba decided to reach out to Soviet Union during the Cold War, and Cuba, as you know, is just a stone's throw away from Miami, from Florida. America cannot allow, back then, Soviet Union, now Russia, to influence a country in its own backyards. The classic Monroe Doctrine. Cuba has no oil. Cuba doesn't have that many natural resources, and yet America, every subsequent American government, from JFK, as you know, the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1962s, and so on. This Cuba cannot be allowed to reach out to someone other than America, and it is a classic manifestation of the Monroe Doctrine. No oil, nothing useful for America, and yet America cannot have anybody else doing anything important in their own backyard. Panama 1989, American forces just walked in Operation Just Cause or Just Because, and abducted the president of Panama, brought him and charged him, with again with drugs or terrorism or whatever the charge was. Once again, why? Because it was and Panama was just beginning to lean away from America, and straight away Monroe Doctrine kicked in. America cannot allow anyone to lean towards someone other than America in its own backyards. There, I can give you dozens of examples. Dominican Republic, 1965, United States intervened because, once again, Dominican Republic was leaning towards, at that point, Soviet Union, couldn't be allowed in America's backyard, and therefore Monroe Doctrine kicked in, and American forces landed in Dominican Republic in 1965, and so on and so forth. Throughout the 50s, in fact, towards the end of 1940s, 1950s, 60s, there was something established in South America called the School of America, and all the dictators, oppressors, torturers were trained by the CIA in the School of Americas. Once again, to basically exert American control and keep American hegemony in its own backyard in Central America. Today, I hadn't looked this up, so this is quite surprising. The School of America that everybody knows, it was notorious for teaching torture techniques by the CIA. What CIA then used after 9/11 and the War of Terror were all originally invented and perfected in the School of Americas. Today, this thing is called Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. Not called School of Americas because it was just a tag of a bunch of brutal oppressors and torturers. Monroe Doctrine. So America made sure that in its own backyard, nobody can exert something. So Venezuela is a prime example of Monroe Doctrine. The story did not begin in 2026. The story of Venezuela actually begins in the 1990s. So what happens is President Hugo Chavez comes to power. He's extremely powerful, extremely popular. He wins an unexpected election in 1998, becomes the president. In 1999, what happens in Venezuela is what is called the Bolivarian Revolution. If you don't know about Bolivarian Revolution, it is basically a form of socialism to ensure that people have adequate health care, adequate education, things to eat, and so on and so forth. So in 1999, Hugo Chavez, gains more power, new powers, amends the constitution, and begins to improve the life of his people. Over the next 2 or 3 years, there was a huge improvement over the lives of the Venezuelan people. And what he begins to do is, in the national interest of Venezuela, he reaches out to Russia and China to help his own people. America, as so, Monroe Doctrine, did not like it. So CIA did a coup in 2002, did a military coup. So this is a classic example of CIA. When you look at any coup in the world, including Imran Khan, latest in Pakistan, they always use the military of that country to remove the democratically elected popular leader. Imran Khan is hugely popular in Pakistan. Everybody knows that. The CIA, then under the government of President Joe Biden, used the Pakistani military to kick him out. And then rest of history. In 2026, Imran Khan is still in jail. What happens in the case of Hugo Chavez is, although CIA coup was successful and he was removed from power, but there was such a massive public protest in Venezuela because he was hugely popular. The CIA coup actually failed, and the public forced the military to back down, and within 2 days he resumes power back. So CIA failed in 2002. I'm sorry. The revolution continues, and he tries to make the lives of his countrymen, his people, better. And all he's trying to do, he's not against America at this time. All he's trying to do is, wherever he can get a good deal, Venezuela has plenty of oil, so wherever he can get a good deal, he tries to reach out, whether it's China, Russia, Europe, doesn't matter. In 2007, what he does is nationalizes oil, gas, electric, and everything else of Venezuela. And this is where America and Venezuela, most certainly fall apart. The reason being is this is right in the backyard of America. So American companies, with Exxon, Chevron, and so on and so forth, had huge shares in Venezuela oil. He nationalizes all of that, kicks them out. Hugo Chavez continues. The reforms slow down but still continue, and he's still beloved by people until he dies in 2013 of cancer. Now, here's a problem. So Venezuela had huge oil, but because of lack of investment in the equipment, a good policy, lack of infrastructure. Now, Saudi Arabia also has huge oil reserves, but they invest a lot of money in keeping their infrastructure and their machinery and everything up to date. Venezuela didn't. So you can see this graph that from the 1960s, the production has been declining, right? And one of the things that Hugo Chavez worked on is actually upgrading the infrastructure, and the production goes up, and it works until he's alive, but then begins to decline under the next government, which is Maduro. So this guy takes over in 2013. He's not as popular. The reforms, he is on the same path, but the reforms are slow and incomplete. Corruption is rising, and by the same time, the oil production is slowing down. Why? Because there is not a lot of investment in the infrastructure. So Maduro is not as popular, and corruption is increasing in Venezuela. That is a fact. So America sees an opportunity, and for the last decade have been trying to bring down the government of Maduro because they understand that he's not as popular as Chavez. So they have tried everything. They've tried sanctioning, and President Trump in November and December continues to attack Venezuelan gunboats and so on and so forth. And now, as I know, CIA has been active in Venezuela. The economy is in tatters. The oil production is at its lowest. So they can go in there with plane full of dollars, bribe everybody. And the other benefit out of this, what's just happened, is within a few hours, a few U.S. Army helicopters landed in Venezuela, abducted the president, came back out. So this is a huge win for President Trump, because this shows the power of U.S. once again. And and don't forget, as I keep saying, this is right in the backyard of America. So this is the reason. This is a continuation of the Maduro doctrine. It doesn't matter whether Iran exists or Israel exists or oil exists or anybody else exists. Monroe Doctrine is a solid pillar of the U.S. foreign policy. You cannot cut away from U.S. and try to make peace with anybody else, whether it is Russia or China. And by the way, when someone breaks away from America in our times, what are the few things they do? They always reach out to China or Russia, and they always become anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian. And this is exactly what Venezuela was doing. Venezuela could not have been allowed to become Cuba #2 for America. So he had to be removed. Now, does this mean the attack on Iran is imminent, and America has done this so they can, as everybody knows that this, if there's another fully blown out war in Iran, the Straits of Hormuz, the pathway for the oil for the world, will be blocked? Yes, there's a possibility in terms of oil, because the oil that is in Venezuela is heavy grade crude oil, which is suitable for American machineries and American refinery. However, the attack on Iran is going to happen, whether it is regardless of Venezuela. So this is one of the things that America has done in its own interest to reinforce the Monroe Doctrine and to show the world quick, clean U.S. force projection. The attack on Iran is going to happen. No matter what Venezuela would have happened or not happened, it's irrelevant. Israel is going to do that at some point, and I've said this in previous few videos that Israel is going to drag American boots into the Middle East. It is inevitable. It is Allah Ta'ala knows best the future, but it is likely that it is going to happen. But this is something that the US has done, and the legality of it does not matter. Now, President Trump is crude. Even if it would happen under Biden or Obama, this is just Monroe Doctrine. It would have happened. All that would have happened under Obama or Joe Biden or anybody else, it would have been, worded differently. It would have been covered differently, versus under President Trump is just a naked aggression of U.S. projection of power. That's all. But it would have happened under any president because, as I keep repeating, You cannot be in America's backyard and break away from America. That cannot be allowed to happen. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.